Hello, my name's Janet and Lorraine has asked me to share a little bit about my new role as a Tearfund speaker and also a bit about Tearfund. Well, Tearfund is a relief and developmental charity that works in 112 countries and has an 800 partners and organisations like churches who are involved. It all began in 1968 when Christians were so horrified when they saw the Biafran victims of famine that they sent lots of money to the Evangelical Relief Fund, and as a result Tearfund was born. Now, I'm really passionate about this charity and started to support it when I was in my 20s. When I was a student training to be a teacher, I went along with some friends from churches in Weymouth and we went to a Cliff Richard concert, and there at the concert he shared about the valuable work that Tearfund was doing, and it was like a light bulb moment for me, because then I realised that I just wanted to try to support this charity. And a few years later, when Martin and I were married, we didn't have permanent jobs, but we decided that after paying our rent and our food bills, and when we had a bit of spare change, we would put it in a little coffee jar like this, and when it was full we would send a cheque to Tearfund. And that's what we did until a few years later, when we got a bit more permanent, we decided to send a regular amount of money each month to Tearfund, as we thought it was really important. When we moved to Warminster, Judith Duddy, who was the editor of the parish magazine, asked if I would like to write an article, and I said, oh yes. And I said, what do you want an article on? And she said, well, anything that you're passionate about. So I decided to write an article on stories about the work of Tearfund. And I would go through the magazine and pick out various stories and write them. And then a few years later, Janet Trott came to me and she said, I'm giving up being Tearfund rep, but would you like to carry it on? And I thought, oh yes, that's really what I want to do. So the Tearfund rep is the main point of contact between the church and the organisation. It also helps people to pray for various projects, raises awareness, and it encourages people to donate, and we hold various activities like bake-offs, Lent lunches, coffee mornings, and of recent years we've done the big quiz night, which has been really fantastic evenings, raising lots of good money for the charity. I thought a little bit about Tearfund and how it works. At the heart of the charity is the Christian faith, and it's not only concerned with relief, but it's also concerned with transforming communities. And as a church we support the water project in Kigezi in southwest Uganda. And in 2005, Pastor Jackson realised there were lots of children dying, and he went to the diocese and said, could we have some clean water? And as a result, the water project came about, and the motto for that project is Jesus is everlasting life, water is life. I would now like to talk to you a little bit about how I came about to be a Tearfund speaker. A few years ago we were at Spring Harvest, and the theme was called Only the Brave, and it was about discipleship, and Simon Ponsonbury spoke about the first few chapters of James, and how as a Christian we need to support the poor. It was a very strong message. Jesus was concerned with that. When he opened his ministry, he proclaimed his ministry. He read, the Spirit of the Lord is on me, because the Lord has anointed me to proclaim good news to the poor. He has sent me to bind up the brokenhearted, to proclaim the freedom to the captives and release darkness to the prisoners, and to proclaim the year of the Lord's favour. And while we were at Spring Harvest, we wandered around the different stalls, and I came across a Tearfund representative, and we got talking, and she told me about her experiences of being a Tearfund speaker. And I thought, oh, that'd be a really great thing that I would like to do. Because often when you're called to do things, God often wants you to follow your passions. And so I thought about it and prayed about it, but I didn't actually do anything till last year in the summer. I contacted Tearfund and I was given an interview and telephone conversation by the trainer, the Reverend Richard Avery. And he wanted to know whether I was really serious about it. And then I was invited to some training. And on that day, we learned about the work of Tearfund, but also about the theology that the charity is based upon. And when Jesus spoke those opening words, the year of the Lord's favour is about Jubilee themes of restoration and renewal. And like Jesus, Tearfund wants to restore relationships between people and God, people and themselves, and people and the wider creation. And Tearfund also tackles poverty from a holistic approach. It meets people's needs, the spiritual as well as material and emotional needs, and it gives people's dignity back. And I was reminded of a story of Elijah, who asked the widow whose sons were going to be sold into slavery because of debt, how could he help her? Likewise, Jesus also asked blind Bartimaeus, what did he want him to do for him? So Tearfund is unique in that it works through local churches in partnership with local people, finding out what their needs are and helping them to transform their lives. So Tearfund is involved with all kinds of work, emergency needs, relief needs, like the tsunami in Indonesia, and it responded by distributing water, dried food, shelter. And some of the volunteers had also lost loved ones, but they still helped other people. It's also concerned with transforming communities, and we support the Connected Church in Kigezi, and that has transformed people's lives amazingly. It also works by restoring peace between different groups of people. For example, in Rwanda, where there was conflict, I heard the story of Claude, who was involved in the atrocities, and he had to spend 9 years in prison. But when he came out, he didn't still feel forgiven, and he got depressed. And through the local church, he was invited to a Bible study, and there he heard the words of Jesus of having freedom and release, and it was a light bulb moment for him, and he was able to get work, support his family. Tearfund also is concerned with advocacy and campaigning, and last year it was the Light Up the Darkness, campaigning for people to have electricity from renewable energy, and this year it's a rubbish campaign, calling on multinational companies to take responsibility for the plastic waste that their products produce. As a Tearfund speaker, I present a talk that Tearfund has organised, and last year it was about a lady called Ruth. Now Ruth had a family of 2 children and a husband, and she found it really hard to feed them. Her crops had failed and she had to go and collect firewood and walk very many miles to the market. And then Ruth heard of some self-help groups from the partner that was working with Tearfund, and they not only saved and gave people loans, but they also had Bible studies. And I'd just like to share with you about Ruth. So she brought some fertiliser, which enabled her crops to grow. She also bought some chickens and a pig, and as a result she could sell her produce and provide for her family, and her dignity has been given back, which is truly amazing. So part of my role is to share the story that Tearfund has decided upon, and last year it was about Ruth. So through Ruth's example, we have seen how the smallest things make a huge difference to people living in poverty. And through the self-help group, she was able to reach her God-given potential. And as a Tearfund speaker, it's important that I encourage people to think what they can do in by standing alongside people like Ruth and being part of this battle against poverty. And by supporting people like Ruth, you can spark changes like tiny seeds that grow into a big tree. And whatever we give, God can magnify these gifts. So at the moment, Tearfund is monitoring. I've had an email from Lisa, who's in charge of a recruitment of speakers, and she says that they are monitoring the COVID-19 virus and how it's going to affect those groups of people who experience extreme poverty. And although the numbers of people who've experienced poverty has reduced, still 1 billion people live in extreme poverty. And that is basically the parents having to decide which children they will feed, whether to buy medicine or food. And our society has changed in the last few days and last week, but we can't imagine what it's like when you have to choose between which child to feed. And those are the types of situations that Tearfund is monitoring, especially if the virus affects these groups of people. And Tearfund is spending time in prayer, asking for God's protection and his wisdom to deal with this global situation. But it's important to remember, as Lisa writes, that we have a God who loves and cares for us. He has told us, "Do not fear, for I am with you." Isaiah 41 verse 10. And we can have courage when faced with the fear of the unknown, because we trust in an all-knowing God who has promised to be with us wherever we go. Joshua 1 verse 9. So next year I shall be able to take on engagements and use the new resources, which I'm really excited about. And I'm expected to do about 4 engagements a year at different churches and organisations. So thank you for listening. And if you want to find how you can support Tearfund, have a look at the website. And it's been really great to share with you about my role and about this amazing charity. Thank you. Bye.